episode of the Business of Business podcast. I'm your host, Roy. Of course, we are the podcast that brings you a wide variety of guests that can talk about a diverse set of topics. We want to try to point some things out that maybe you hadn't thought about, or either provide support for things that are keeping you up at night. We also have professionals in many different fields that come on, give us their expert opinion, and today is no different. We are excited to have Felix KO back with us. He has accrued over 15 years of business experience when it comes to sales and marketing. He has been featured in major media outlets such as the HuffPost, Adweek, and Authority magazine, and also appeared on major Canadian morning radio show to talk about neuromarketing and the 2019 Canadian election. You can find him on numerous top podcasts where he shares neuromarketing insights on how businesses can grow and thrive during the pandemic, and then, of course, moving forward in 2021. Today, at his neuromarketing company called Happy Buying Brain, he is combining his 15 years of business experience with his educational background in biology, science, and psychology to help businesses truly understand what makes their customers' brains tick when it comes to better achieving customer brand loyalty over their competitors through the power of marketing, implementing neuromarketing into their own marketing campaigns. Felix, thanks so much and welcome to the show again. We appreciate you coming back to talk with us.
Hi, Roy. Well, thank you for having me back on the show. I definitely appreciate it. This is exciting.
Yeah, for visitors, for new listeners that maybe didn't hear your history before, just give us a brief rundown of kind of what led you to this spot in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, in your introduction, and thank you for the introduction.
Yeah.
Many thanks there. So as you touched on, I come from an educational background that strongly resides in biological science and psychology, right? So that was so initially the journey was to go into more of the medical field during that time. But then I got introduced, obviously, to the world of business, and from there on, got involved in industries such as the finance and investments, which eventually segued into the world of technology. So, mobile in the 2010s was very, very popular. It was a growing field. I spent nearly a decade there, and just coming out of it now is I believe that we're at the cusp of another technological revolution, mainly in artificial intelligence, machine learning, virtual reality. And when I looked at the landscape of where, let's say, technology was going and how it was going to penetrate everyday life, was that neuroscience was actually the core of a lot of these innovations. So as we were familiar with, anything that becomes familiarized or really popular, concepts that are related to it also become more mainstream, right? So when when neuroscience is now applied to the field of, let's say, medicine and technology, what I saw was, for the growth of the entire discipline, was that actually is going to start to become a lot more permeated in all the different areas of our lives. And, one of the biggest things that I saw was that neuroscience was going to be a huge thing when it came to marrying the world, the scientific world, with marketing and sales and business in general. So,
Right.
it's really a combination of educational background, 15 plus years of experience, having an extensive, background in terms of now technology over a decade, and the timing right now seems to be ripe for neuromarketing.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I think it is, like you said, it is time. There's so much, there's just so much coming at the consumer on a daily basis that we have to find a way to, kind of get to the heart of the issue of whatever they're needing and how to
Right.
best speak to them, because we all like our messaging somewhat. I mean, I'm sure there's groups, but different groups like different messaging and different things we can do to attract them that may turn another group completely off.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. It's just so neuromarketing is really the window that allows, let's say, companies to gain that much deeper understanding
Right.
of, the underlying mechanisms that are happening inside their consumers' brains, so that they could craft their marketing messages to
Yeah.
connect with them,
Yeah.
a lot better, right?
Yeah, and I think we touched on this a little bit last time, but it's not only the marketing message, but
Right.
it's also the packaging of the product, and there's just so much more that companies really do give a lot of thought over.
Yeah, 100% there. So
Yeah,
obviously core brand messaging is a huge component, but it's the entire experience, right? Because you just don't go to a restaurant and just have a good meal. It's the atmosphere, everything that comes along with it, very similar to when a consumer has brand loyalty to a specific company,
yeah,
the product is great, let's say, but it's also the entire experiencing, the packaging. Apple and Tiffany's is notorious for the sound that comes when somebody opens the packaging. It's a all that stuff adds to the experience for sure. So
yeah.
companies do put in a lot of thought into all the details, in addition to the core brand messaging.
Yeah, and there's different. Just don't want to belabor it, but just the.
Hmm.
I think it was one of the chip manufacturers.
Yeah,
It
Frito-Lay's.
no.
Frito-Lay's.
Well, I was thinking Intel. They
Yeah.
had.
Oh, chip. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They had that little. It was just like a little bong bong, bing bong bong. Whenever they
Yeah.
had it was instantly recognizable. You didn't have to read the copy or hear what was said, but once you heard that sound, instantly brand
You knew
recognition.
that it was Intel, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and I didn't mean to interrupt you on the other chip. Sorry about that. So, what was the Frito?
Oh, Frito-Lay's.
Yeah,
But that's first of all, before we get into that,
yeah,
that's a wonderful way for a company to associate, let's say, the ping of a noise, and then having that connect to their
yeah.
brand, right? So just the fact that, their consumers would hear that sound would activate in their brains this kind of like neural map
Right.
of all their experiences, memories, thoughts, and so forth to bring their product and their brand top of mind,
Yeah, and
right?
it's
So
simple. It's a simple concept, a noise and a reaction. But I know that figuring that out is probably not. That's not the simple part. I mean, it's probably a lot of years of research and
oh,
testing
100%.
go into that.
Yeah, it's the same idea. I know that Google uses a specific blue because they've ran tons and tons of tests of it to get people to click on it. So
Yeah,
that's one example of something that seems so simple of having the color of, let's say, a little, some words, but also it would impact their users, let's say, wanting to click on those words, right, based on the color itself. So it's similar to the same idea of that, building the association between a sound and then connecting it with the brand.
right, right. So, what was the? We're going to talk about the Frito Lay. What were you going to say about
Oh
that?
yeah,
Yeah,
it was just a matter of how, when we're talking about the importance of not only core brand messaging but also the packaging,
yeah,
right? So, at that time, in the late 2000s, close to 2010s, their Frito-Lay's, was looking to gain a greater market share into their female audience. And what they found, when they ran, studies, brain studies, is that the packaging was actually done in a shiny type of format, right? And that would activate an area of the brain that was, responsible for decision making, but also guilt. So that revealed that there was an association happening in the brains of the female participants, that whenever their participants would view a shiny their current shiny Frito-Lay's package, that it would also trigger feelings of guilt eating
yeah,
it, right? So in order for them to actually create a much more positive association, they changed their packaging from a shiny style to a more of a beige matte style. And what they found when they actually conducted brain studies was there's a dramatic reduction in that same area. So now that indicated or suggested that the responses from their female participants was a lot more positive
yeah.
to the new packaging.
Interesting.
Yeah,
It's amazing how our brain works, and just something so subtle can make such a huge
big
difference.
difference,
Yeah.
right? It's a huge nudge for sure.
Yeah. And, you mentioned females, and not to pick on them, but I'm sure that consumer
Hmm.
goods, because they're the
Right.
ones in the grocery store typically shopping, I'm sure that
Yeah.
the consumer goods do a lot of studies, based on females.
Yeah. Well, when we look at it, like females in general, in terms of the decision making for purchasing, it could be as high as 80%. So they're the really main drivers when it comes to making a lot of the consumer choices, right?
Yeah.
And it was just very important in terms of, there's a lot of similarities in terms of brain structure, but there's also some common or some differences that play into the decision making process that companies should be aware of, right?
Interesting.
And some of them are some of these brain structures are the limbic system. So that system is more involved in, let's say, things such as emotions, memories, and and social situations, right?
Okay.
So the way that that plays out in terms of the world of marketing is that when let's say, for example, a company that is looking to, let's say, put out an ad that's targeted to more towards female, one of the biggest thing is social harmony, for example, because that part of the brain, the limbic system, one of its core functions is to evaluate things on a social situation. And from an evolutionary point of view as well, that's actually increases the chances of, let's say, gathering food, for example, to bring back to the family, or for child rearing, where even to today, you have play dates, and you have moms coming together, and all that stuff is really the genesis of that part of the brain that looks at things from a social point of view, right? So for a company to come in and create, let's say, an ad to really want to emphasize that social aspect, and show, let's say, people in close proximity, but to take that even a notch higher is to actually have the let's say, the people in the ad actually physically touching each other, because that actually activates what we call oxytocin, which is a hormone that is responsible for bonding, right? So this is something that's very common when, let's say, a mother has a baby
Yeah.
during that time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess there's well, there used to be an old saying that said that we buy on emotion and then we justify with logic. Does that
Right.
still pretty much hold true?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, one of the things is there's something called bottom-up processing. So everyone understands or is familiar with left and right brain, right? So left is more logical, right is like more the creative side. But really, um, the flow of information. So this is very important that to mention as well, is understanding how the brain is structured and how information physically enters the brain.
Yeah.
So a lot of that will actually support, the whole notion of buying based on emotion, and backing up based on logic, right? So the flow from the bottom up is actually at the base of your brain is, you really have your reptilian brain, right, or your physical brain,
Yeah.
because so that's really responsible. It's fast, impulsive, reflexive, and it's really responsible for your fight or flight type of responses, right? So information goes from that to assess situations that are, let's say, a threat or non-threat to the individual. And let's say that it passes from there into the next level, which is the midbrain, the limbic system that we
Yeah.
touched on, that was more deals with emotions, memories, and social situations. So it starts to look at things from, like, from an emotion point of view, what kind of associations you have into that. Do you have good memories or thoughts of something of the stimuli? And then who else is kind of using this kind of
Yeah.
thing, right? And then it passes on to finally the last part of the brain, which is the cortex, and that's your logical part of the brain. So it starts to look at things from, like a statistical point of view, figures, facts, and things like that. So when you actually see how that path of information gets traveled, at first that's where the emotion kind of comes in at the midbrain, and then let's say that someone makes a purchase, and then it finally gets to the last part of the brain to receive information, which is the cortex, and that's the logical part.
Yeah. And I think I was just thinking about car and truck advertising and the
Hmm.
difference, because typically, the woman would drive the car,
Right.
but you see, like you said, the touching. You usually see them taking a lot of times children to
Hmm.
events or dropping them off
Yeah.
at school. But then when you never see them like a guy splitting a fuel injector open and saying, "Hey, look at the flow of fuel through this thing." But
Exactly.
but when we talk about the trucks, I guess targeting men in the group
Hmm.
is, it's a lot more about the power and how tough it is, dropping stuff in the bed of it. Not too many people hugging and, doing all the emotional
Yeah,
stuff in the truck commercial.
100%, right? If you're looking towards something that's gravitating more to the social concept, then of course it's more like, oh, we you want to buy this SUV because you could fit the family in there and you have more space for, let's say, the baby stroller, so to
Yeah.
speak. But for let's say the male demographic, that might be important as well. But it's also, like, can I take this off-roading,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Like, so
Yeah.
so it's kind of like a different type of approach, even though there is crossover. But probably off-roading is on the mind of most male consumers who are looking at bigger vehicles, especially trucks, right?
Exactly. So, we're in an interesting time coming out of the pandemic.
Hmm.
Have you noticed any? Are there any large consumer shifts that are happening, or is everybody still kind of holding back, kind of still wait and see attitude right this moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think right now it's maybe a combination of both. I think from the consumer point of view, it seems like the consumers want to go out and actually experience life
Yeah.
again. And from a business point of view, of course, they're looking to make up for that revenue, but also at the same time being very strategic in terms of how they reopen.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of this dance
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
on because nobody knows what's going to happen,
Yeah.
in the next foreseeable future.
Yeah, there was a story not, I guess this week or last week about that, while everybody was home and stranded, a lot of
Hmm.
home improvement projects. Well,
Yeah.
now that the airlines have opened back up, people have like ditched the home improvement projects
Yeah,
and
and,
they're
and
wanting
jumped
to
on the
buy ticket.
plane to
Yeah,
go wherever they wanted to go, right? Yeah.
exactly.
I remember reading about that as well.
Yeah,
So it's quite a change, and I think that everybody wants to kind of have things return back to normal as much as possible.
yeah, yeah, and it's and the other thing I think for our businesses out there, they've been struggling with some staff shortages in places, and
Hmm.
also some of their raw material shortages that have
Right.
really, and talking about home builders, the price of lumber has just skyrocketed. So,
Hmm.
but anyway, even the local restaurants, we were talking pre-show
Ingredients.
about the ingredients in some fast
Yeah.
food restaurants that have been short. So I mean the businesses are dealing with a lot of challenges.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of things that's on the radar for sure. Dealing with, like workers, employment. Can you bring in the labor force to come in and run the business, and all the way through to, like the materials to actually create the consumer product, and also, people are probably are in a different state of mind as well, as they make this transition into more of the social world, if you want to call it real life social world.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different variables that come into things as we approach the next stage here.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier. You mentioned
Hmm.
stress and irritation, and I see that in some consumers. It's just
Right.
it's a trying time because it's like some people are trying to open up and get back to normal, and maybe it's
Hmm.
not happening as fast for them. But
Right.
I think if you're the neuroscientist that can really give the answer. But do you think that there's like a lot of pent up frustration and anxiety that consumers are kind of bringing into this time period?
Well, definitely, like when we look at it from a neuroscience point of view, the primal brain, is certainly in a heightened state, or a much more heightened state of, let's say, anxiety,
Yeah.
uncertainty, due to all the turbulence that's happening, right? So really, when you look at the brand, so the brand is this a verb or emotional state, is to really help the consumer come to a level where it alleviates a lot of those, let's say, stresses, if you want to call it that, right?
Yeah.
So that's the main goal of a brand, to help return that level of normalcy so that they could, just have some sense of satisfaction and fulfillment, which is something that has been, highly affected over the last probably year and a half
Right.
during that time. And there's certain, of course, there's certain ways, like on a one-to-one interaction, or and so forth, of how that would affect, let's say, a business, in terms of how to what would increase the effectiveness and we could touch on that as well. And I
Yeah.
think we talked about sleep being very, very important because try resolving a situation when you have one or both parties in an agitated state,
Right. Right.
right? Like the primal brain is highly active and it shuts off the cortex, so
Yeah.
the logical part of the brain goes offline.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
think,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, and I think that we can even talk a little bit about how businesses really need to take care of their employees through this time because,
Hmm.
you know, companies that are short of people, the people that do show up, they're working
Right,
on, from can to can't, and they
right.
get tired, and then it just takes one little like, hey, you got that order wrong, and it's like, bah, and
Hmm.
it's unnecessary. I understand why it happens, but if we as employers, we need to not only monitor our employees, make sure they're getting their rest or have their chance to get, even if they
Right.
say, I'm fine, I can do another double. At some
Hmm.
point, we have to, be the logical one and say, look, you really need a rest before
Yeah.
something bad. And, we noticed this in, I used to do a lot of work in the senior living industry and be like in a nursing home environment. And
Hmm.
what we noticed was that was when staff tended to be more abusive, not necessarily physical,
Right.
but more short with the residents or verbally
Hmm.
abusive when they had worked a couple of double shifts. There's not enough staff. They know they're going to have to keep doubling. They're missing their
Right.
family events, and that their agitation level just was,
Increases,
yeah,
right?
it's just right on the
Hmm.
cusp. So any little thing would just put them over the edge. And I think that we're not seeing it wholesale, but I think that if we're not careful, we will see a lot of that, in some
Hmm.
industries out there today.
Yeah, that's a great point that you brought up in terms of being overworked, burned out, and not having time to spend, let's say, with loved ones
Yeah.
and friends. And from a company point of view, there's obviously, there's ways to support, let's say, your employees and and the people that work with you
Yeah.
that really make the company run. And as I mentioned, one is sleep, and the reason why that's so is it does several things. It actually prunes the pathways in the brain and really and strengthen the ones that are in use. So what that does is it pretty much clears the highway from for like neurons to speak to each other.
Oh, okay.
So what it does is when someone's in a confused state, it's easy to get agitated.
Yeah.
So sleep really kind of opens up these highways so that the cells within the brains can communicate with each other, which reduces the chances of someone getting frustrated,
Yeah.
right? So that's why getting adequate sleep really, really matters because it strengthens, really highways that are important
Yeah.
and really reduces or cleans out the ones that are not in use, right? So that's one reason.
Yeah.
The second reason why, it's important to get good rest is it actually allows the brain to consolidate what you learn in that day so your memories get strengthened. So it moves it from an area called the hippocampus, which is kind of like your short-term and medium-term memory, and then it gets transported to your cortex for long-term storage if you
Yeah.
want. So that way, when let's say the next day you wake up well rested, it's this exact same idea where someone does not feel agitated because their thoughts are a lot more clear on
Yeah.
what they need to do, right? So that's the power of the neuroscience behind the importance of good sleep.
Yeah.
The other one actually is taking walks, being around nature.
Yeah.
And what it does is it calms the primal brain by actually strengthening the cortex, which in this case, it's like if you to see as an organization, you have the executive team, like the leadership team, that let's say communicates with let's say the frontline workers. And if the leadership team is all in disarray, then you could bet that the workers underneath are going to
Right.
do whatever they want, and before you know it, you just have a big mess, right? So by
Yeah.
having a very, very strong leadership team that could actually help communicate effectively with their workers, then you have something that is a much more well-run organization, and that's what happens when let's say taking walks or being around nature, is that part of the brain or the leadership team becomes a lot more strengthened,
Yeah.
and it's able to regulate the primal brain a lot more effectively, right? So those are two big things to keep in
Yeah.
mind. The third thing is having support programs that facilitate you know being social, even having fun outside of work. I think that's rebuilding that camaraderie again.
Yeah.
I had been missing for the last year and a half. So
Yeah.
by combining those things, is that's how companies could support their workers.
Yeah, and what about stimulus? I was just thinking
Hmm.
because sometimes it kind of acts like lack of sleep for me. Is that if you're in a heavy stimulus environment, you've just got things coming at you
Right,
constantly, questions and this, and always having to kind of be on your step thinking about this next thing. If
right.
if we have a lot of that in a short period of time, that can act. I'm asking as a question: does that act kind of like going for a long time without getting any sleep? That it just wears our brain down?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
Because at the end of the day, our brains need time to rest and recover,
yeah,
right? So burnout is, it's a likely scenario.
yeah.
So during that time, there's only so many second wins that someone could get,
Right,
right?
right.
So it's the same idea. So even though the person may be going off of, let's say, adrenaline and all the other good stuff, but what ends up happening is it becomes a law of diminishing returns as well. So even though, let's say, there's much more benefit to, let's say, study for a short period of time than just dragging it out and not sleeping for 3 days and pulling all-nighters. Even though if you look at the time itself, it's like, well, someone dedicated, let's say 20 hours over 3 days, but they're not going to remember anything because as I mentioned before, during sleep, that's how your memories and your learning gets consolidated,
Yeah,
right? So there's this kind of like this middle ground that needs to happen in terms of optimizing someone's
yeah,
thought processes and regulating their emotions.
yeah. Yeah, and like you said, that what works for me well is that walk. Sometimes just taking a little 15-minute walk, it
Hmm.
makes a world of difference to just kind of clear your head. And I know there's a lot of research on the creative part too. Is that
Hmm.
we cannot be creative when we're constantly being bombarded with stimulus. We have to have that quiet
Yeah,
time to think and be creative.
100% agree with you on that.
Yeah,
Yeah, those walks, they're so valuable. It seems, it's only 15, 20 minutes, but what it does on a neurological level on the brain is it's significant.
yeah, yeah,
Right. So it's yeah, it just allows, clear thinking, allows the primal brain to be a lot more regulated and not under control, and rather have it like act as a loose cannon. And that's when a lot of the kind of irrational behaviors happen, where it just takes a little to put someone over the top.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
So I think you mentioned, I'm not, maybe it was pre-show or last time we talked, that
Mhm.
stress can actually reduce parts of the brain. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. So right now, obviously, for some people, that's a reality, right? So based on all the different circumstances, and on a brain level, what ends up happening is we talked about the cortex, which is like the leadership executive team, right?
Yeah,
So stress actually reduces the amount of area they call gray area, or this think of that part of the brain that's your executive team, shrinks
yeah,
pretty much. So they're and then what ends up happening is there's a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is your kind of your emotion area of the brain that's found in the midbrain of your primal brain, and that's like where a lot of your fears and that kind of stuff comes out. That area that actually gets bigger. So you have this executive team at the top kind of shrink,
yeah,
and then you have the amygdala, which is your emotions and one of its fear. There's a big imbalance here, so that's why stress has a big effect on the areas of the brain, and that's one way to look at it, as like kind of like the power of balance
yeah,
of a shrinking executive team and a growing a growing base underneath it that without control is
right,
acts like a loose cannon.
yeah. Yeah, and I know this is kind of off topic from sales and marketing, but I guess I think it's important because of the damage. If we're
Hmm.
not careful, if we don't think all this through, the
Right.
damage that we can do to our company, to our brand, that can be permanent. I mean, sometimes we don't get out from under that if we've got staff that's on the ragged edge and maybe they don't
Hmm.
treat our customers right. And then, we've got again, I'll ask this as a question, but it seems that we have a little bit more of the cancel culture
Right.
going on. So it's like if I come into your establishment and I feel like you've wronged me, then I'm like, I am never going back, and I'm telling
Mm-hmm.
everybody, I'm telling all my friends, never go back. Sometimes it amounts to something, sometimes it doesn't. But really, as a business owner, in the fragile environment that we're operating in right this moment, you just can't really chance any of that.
Right. Yeah. So the culture is, especially now that everybody pretty much has a voice on social media and on
Right.
the internet, right? So that's, so for a company, it's almost like the way to really look at it is the reason why that really exists, and really it's like kind of like a dichotomy of polar opposites, as to say, right? It's
Yeah.
like it's a big contrast between A and B, for example. But to really get down to it is to really break out this us versus them type of thinking,
Yeah.
is to find a way to make, as the your consumer base as inclusive as possible in different circles. So really you're expanding your click to these different areas of value that also overlap with the consumer. So before it would be, for example, was this based on product? Someone would go to a company and they would really, really like the product, and then that's how kind of like the relationship was built on. But now, as we see it, brands are now having to extend and deal with more social matters.
Yeah.
For example, equality, gender, all that stuff now. So now it's like now companies to go beyond just, okay, we provide the best products and services, so come to us and you'll value it. To now it's like, okay, we provide the best products and services, but also we understand that, okay, this is some of your values as well. We share some of those
Yeah.
values. So
Yeah.
that's something that's becoming really important in terms of companies expanding kind of like their web of values, right? So that it starts to, really get connected
Yeah.
with their consumers as more of a whole rather than just product, service, buy
Yeah.
type of
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I just did an interview with an author, Lynn Yap. She wrote The Altruistic Capitalist. And,
Okay.
basically, what we were talking about is, these companies are getting squeezed on three sides. The consumer wants them to be socially, environmentally, socially, and
Mm-hmm.
management responsible, but
Right.
investors are actually asking for that same thing. And now
Mm-hmm.
employees are kind of stepping up and wanting that same thing. So companies are, they're really going to get squeezed into doing the right things. And,
Right.
it's just a matter of making sure that we develop some checks and balances because, one of my questions always is, hey, I can tell you I'm environmentally sensitive while I'm, pouring, toxic waste out the back door here. So, it's easy. Sometimes it's easier said than done.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
think as you brought some really good points there in terms of that would be more of an accountability issue,
Yeah.
right? When somebody or let's say an entity or a brand, for example, or a company or business mentions that they're going to do a certain task, do they actually carry out with it, right? And
Right.
social media that's one of the things that has enabled people the ability to self express themselves, and brands to have social identities as well, and that's how the ability to communicate effectively. And I think that's where the key is, the communication, because
Right.
all those channels are there. Is now how, from a brand point of view, how did they communicate with their consumers based on, let's say, carrying through and showing accountability for what it is that they had mentioned,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
broadcast to the public.
Yeah. Yeah. I had one other question, kind of back
Sure.
on the council on the cancel culture,
Hmm.
and kind of this maybe like a heightened state of agitation that a lot
Right.
of people are in for what we all the uncertainties that we've talked about. So, is part of this like an illusion of control issue? Is that things have been so out of everybody's control? These things have been forced on us for the last year or so. Now I've got some control to
Right.
get on social media, and I realize social media and
Hmm.
the reach that we have there
Hmm.
has influenced it some. But do you think that it's part of this trying to gain a little bit of control back of our life?
I think that's the goal for pretty much anybody, right? When
Right.
when we really look at it, I think what has happened has just kind of opened the doors to more what was really going on. And then but yeah, that's in terms of that sense of control, it could be just, can I communicate with this person?
Yeah.
Can I share my ideas? Right. So that's something I don't think will ever change. Is this now there's a lot more opportunities and channels to share and to express what someone is feeling
Yeah.
and thinking. So in terms of that, is this that's just the way that we're moving in terms of you know a wide platform for people to communicate.
Yeah.
But there's also things that come out of it where obviously they would have to be, there's certain things that that comes with like the like the positives and negatives of any situation, right?
Yeah.
So is this a matter of how do we navigate this to make sure people are still heard, but done in a way that continues to move our society forward?
Yeah. Yeah, and I've always communicated with businesses as a consumer because, a lot of times I feel like the business may not know what's going wrong because
Right.
they're not necessarily their own customer every day. So
Hmm.
sometimes it just doesn't hurt to politely, I'll stress that politely, reach out to the company and say, hey, I had this experience. And then if they're good and they do what they're supposed to by saying, you know
Hmm.
what, we probably made a mistake. Let me take a
Yeah.
look and we'll fix it. That's awesome, But again, we've talked a little bit about reviews and things like that.
Hmm.
Don't throw gasoline on that one either, and just start well, you're a pretty bad consumer, so
Right.
as I have
Yeah.
seen those where it's like somebody reaches out with what may be a legitimate issue, and the business owner just goes all crazy on them.
Exactly. Well, it comes down, as you mentioned, to accountability as well, right? But it's almost like the way to see it is the responsibility lies on all parties involved.
Right.
So at the end of the day, a company could only control what they can control, just
Right.
like in real life, an individual could only can control what they can control. So the approach needs to be a very holistic approach where it takes in all these different factors and variables rather than just singling one variable out
Yeah.
and saying that, hey, we fix this, everything else is going to fall in this place. But here, as you mentioned, there's a lot of changes that are happening or that has happened over the last year and a half that are influencing the way that people think, feel, and expressing themselves.
Yeah.
So the concept needs to take in all those different drivers and then find the best way to make everything align as best as
Yeah.
possible so that as a unit or as a collective unit, it moves from in the direction that you want it to come rather than, okay, you fix one thing but then the muffler falls off,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
example, right? So there's different aspects to the situation that has a much greater chance of success when they're addressed together.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a good technique. It's called something about the difference between how you react and how you respond. We can
Hmm.
take that all in, but if we'll take about 2, 3, 4 breaths before we actually respond, sometimes we'll be much better off in the long run for that.
Exactly. That's a
Yeah.
great point. There's actually a book, and maybe that's what you're alluding to, by Mel Robbins, written in 2017, called The 5 Second Rule.
Oh,
And
okay.
that's probably where there's probably a connection
Oh,
between that. But it's pretty much saying that confronted with a situation, instead of just acting out really quick,
yeah.
take the time to count backwards,
Yeah.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Because what that does, it actually allocates the blood from that agitated part of the brain where it's just so easy to like lash out at somebody back into the cortex, so it turns it back on, and then it turns the logical side of the process back, and then from there on, it could be one step to reducing an impulsive action, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
But it also works the other way, where if someone's in uh, let's say stage of procrastination, also counting down from 5 will bring the blood flow back into the cortex, and
Interesting.
then that would be the moment to act. Otherwise, nobody's going to take any action, and things get procrastinated or delayed for X amount
Yeah.
of time,
Yeah.
right? So same idea there, but the neuroscience is how you're allocating the blood flow from one area of the brain to the next in order
And,
to really turn on the part of the brain that you need to work.
oh, that's cool. I'm going to try that. I need to take the trash out after a while. I'm going to do that and see if I can get motivated to
Yeah,
carry it
exactly.
outside.
So there's different things, and the primal brain and the logical brain it's almost like this tug of war because the primal brain wants things now. It's almost
Yeah.
like the little kid, right? Wants
Yeah.
things now. It's impulsive, whereas the logical brain is like the grown-up adult, for example, or the parent, and they're more and the primal brain or the logical brain is more long-term thinking. So it's a matter of how do you come up with strategies to make them work together, very similar to your situation with you're taking businesses with consumers and so forth, and everyone is having this big conversation with each other,
Right.
and then but making sure that the conversations are very valuable and effective, right? In
Yeah.
terms of moving things in the right direction, as opposed to just talking about a bunch of things and then just adding more powder to the keg, if you want to call
Right.
it.
Right. So
Yeah.
what are some? Let's look at the some as we open up. A lot
Hmm.
of let's just kind of stick with restaurants for a minute because I know
Right.
some of them have kind of limited menus. They've cut it
Hmm.
down to be more manageable. They're still doing a lot of takeout, and they still encourage a lot of takeout. I know that
Hmm.
we've had places around here that they just have to close the dining room down because they don't have staff to staff it up.
Right.
But what are some things that businesses can do to I guess to be proactive with the consumer about uh, I don't know, coaxing them back, or trying to
Right.
let them know kind of what's going on, so that it doesn't have to turn into a thing. Everybody can understand, not the way we want to operate. Unfortunately, we
Hmm.
just have to operate this way.
Yeah, so the number one thing is obviously to make it safe. If let's say your restaurant, you have a dining room, that's the number one thing, right? So
Yeah,
let's say that there's a restaurant that's open and they want to encourage people to come, that they know it's going to be safe, but also quick at the same time. They're not sitting there waiting for 2 hours to get a seat. So they're going to have the restaurant's going to have some sort of system in place to facilitate that just that traffic. Let's say
yeah,
gets really really busy, because the last thing, especially right now, is have a waiting consumer, because that primal brain already, it goes, look, I want, now is my opportunity to get out and have some sort of social life other than this staying at home for the last 18 months. But now let's say they get there, and then they find out that they have to now wait another half an hour, 2 hours,
yeah.
or whatever it is. Like that's just gonna really take someone over the edge, right? So,
Right.
so what one of the things is just having processes in place where it could help facilitate kind of like that type of traffic. If, or even one of the restaurants is, one of the things they could do is, assuming that they have the resources, is to actually expand their patio,
Yeah,
right? So that's something that, like, because chances are most restaurants, they can't just knock down a wall
yeah,
and then like put more tables in there. But the patio, assuming that there's space there, that's a much more cost efficient way to add
yeah.
more chairs. That would be, instead of, without doing that, the customer that waits there for 2 hours now only has to, the waiting time is a lot shorter,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. And we've seen around here some that have even taken up some of their parking space. If they have enough extra parking, taking up
Hmm.
some of those front parking spaces and setting up tents and outside
Exactly.
facilities. That's a good
Yeah,
idea.
just doing those things that will make a big difference for the customer experience, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
obviously, um, you know, uh, everybody has kind of been inside for the last year and a half. Is now continue to market and to be front of mind again, right? So that's going to be a huge thing in terms of being on the radar again.
yeah, yeah. And I think communication, we can't overstress that enough. As we just have to have
Hmm.
a good open line of communication. And the gym that I go to, they actually put a meter on the little. You have an app that you have to show the card when you walk through the
Hmm.
door, but they put a little meter on it to show how crowded it is. So,
Right.
and I think that was pretty cool because you can evaluate even if you want to go over there. Not let's just don't even think about the COVID crisis for a minute. Just you don't want to
Hmm.
go to a crowded gym, have to stand around and wait to get on a machine. So it allows a customer to be a little bit more informed, and some of these restaurants would do good at just being honest. And some of them think that they're doing
Hmm.
their some of them think that they're being a little bit tricky by saying, "Oh yeah, well, it's just 15 minutes." But when 15 turns into
Hmm.
45, then all you've done is really make some people mad.
Exactly. So that's actually really neat to hear that the gym that you go to actually has that type of in neuroscience it's called biometrics. It's almost like, oh, what's your heart rate,
Yeah.
right? Or like that's what it is, or the dilation of the people, for example, or for instruments that are measuring this kind of like your physiological reaction
Yeah.
and responses to stimuli. So from the outside, for example, in the medical field, let's say in the operation room, they would hook you up to those machines and they'll show you your heart rate. So you would know how the person is actually where they're at on a physiological level.
Right.
So the same thing applies now to, let's say, the gym or the restaurant, where people know, oh, there's some sort of indication or external indicator that says, oh, this restaurant's like 90% full, for example. So that's going to impact whether someone's okay with coming there, knowing that they're going to wait a long time, or being like, okay, you know what, maybe I'm going to have to have a look at another option, right? And that's one of the reasons why Uber and a lot of companies follow suit is to have you're able to track your Uber driver because that eliminates the stress of, where's my food,
Right.
right? It
Right.
eliminates that fear, right? So it brings that level of certainty and be like, oh, like my food is only 5 minutes away and so forth. It's that's a similar type of concept when it
Yeah.
comes to, oh, this restaurant is 80%, 90% full. Do I want to go here or not?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that applies to a lot of things. And I'll use me for example. Is you want to be patient and you want to wait. So let's take the
Right.
food delivery. It's like they said it'd be here in 20 minutes. Okay, it's been 30, but you know what? They're behind traffic. We got all this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and so you can be patient, and then all of a sudden, when you're at 45 minutes, you're like, hey, it's kind of like there's this line where you're
Right.
patient, but you never know, when do I not be patient? When do I pick up the phone and give somebody a call? I don't want to rush them. I know
Right.
that there's external circumstances. And so this is, again, back where communication and, implementing whatever we can to
Right.
help that customer understand where they are in their journey. It's invaluable.
Oh, exactly. So, having some sort of system that would let someone know, almost like an ordering system. For
Yeah.
example, if you're at the back working and creating the meals, there's some sort of timeline. I know, like if you look at fast food restaurant, for example, they'll let you know, hey, like in 60 seconds, where should it be along the way, pretty much. And,
Right.
and the same thing would apply from a consumer point of view when they're looking to engage with the company, right? It's kind of like, I'm waiting in line here. What position am I in line?
Yeah.
And in the groceries, or in the earlier, like I think they removed that system. Was everybody used to take a ticket? You remember
Oh,
that? Oh,
yes.
you
Yeah.
wanted your favorite cold cut meats, for example. Here's the machine, and take a number, and we'll call your number. So at least you like,
Yeah.
it's very straightforward. It's hard to say, hey, look, I'm before you, right? If someone's holding a ticket with a number closer to being front of line, so it's
Right.
a similar idea.
Oh my, yeah, and that's pretty good. Except it backfired at the driver's license office. When you walk up there and you see the
Hmm.
click and like they're on number 10, and you pull like number 312 off of the machine. You're like,
Yeah,
yeah,
so
yeah, it's gonna be a
there's
long
always going to
day.
be some sort of variation, right? Where it could work for, or in that case, a lot of people, because they're not too excited to renew to do those tasks. But if
Right.
someone goes, oh, look, I'm moving up in the line,
Yeah.
and I know that, hey, I'm gonna, let's say, finally get seated and have a meal, then the type of anticipation is different, right? So
Yeah.
there's different. What's happening is the dopamine is the activities, the two different activities are have a different impact on the dopamine levels, right?
Yeah. Well, Felix, we appreciate you taking time out of your day to come talk with us. This is all great information. I
Hmm.
just, I think that this is such an interesting discipline, and it's needed. I mean, as sales and as marketing, we want to be able to reach our customers, give them the message, and do
Right.
all the activities that we need to do, in order to make that a pleasant experience for sure.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, Roy, and to be on your podcast. And I'm just absolutely privileged to be a return guest on here. And I
Yeah.
hope
Thank you.
that
You're
our conversation here is going to provide a lot of insights to help your listeners in their entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. Yeah, it will. And I'll do like I did last time. I'll, extend an invitation to get you back on here in 2 or 3 months and
Perfect.
see kind of, how this environment has changed and,
Mm.
if there's anything that as businesses that we need to be doing, a little bit different to take care of. The other thing, we talk a lot about prospects, but
Mm-hmm.
also to take care of our current customers. I mean,
Yeah.
that's an important thing. Sometimes we and I'm guilty of that. We think about how we're going to get the next new guy, and we're not thinking about taking care of the people that
Mm-hmm.
we've got under already.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah,
Is they're that's why they're a customer, right? It's it would make sense to take care of them. So
exactly. Yeah,
I think that goes a huge way,
yeah,
and the consumer, the customer, they'll definitely remember that.
yeah. All right. Well, tell us, give us another tool or another habit. Give us something that you do every day that really adds a
Hmm.
lot of value to your life, either professionally or personally.
I would say meditating.
Okay.
Meditating even for 10, 15 minutes. It certainly has a way to rewire the brain, makes things a lot more calmer, clears up the thinking. And that's something that will, generally what I found my personal experience to impact how the rest of the day
Yeah,
goes.
yeah.
Right. So, personally, that's something that has been effective for in my own life. And, hopefully that will encourage some people to try that and
Yeah.
then see how it affects, their life moving forward.
Yeah, and I'm pretty new at this. I've been trying it, and one thing I implemented was in the evening too, because it gives me a little bit of separation from whatever I was doing until trying to lay down and sleep. It gives me that
Exactly.
clear head. But what I have to say is I am not good at it, and I find myself some days being all over the place. But I think it's one of these things you just have to stay after it because
Yeah, you just practice, right? Like there's no easy way around it. Like as much
right,
as we like to take, some sort of accelerated shortcut, it doesn't
yeah,
matter of, it's like typically if a baby is getting born, it needs 9 months
yeah,
kind of
right,
thing, right?
right.
So it's anything rushing it, it does like it typically does not work as well as we would
Right.
like it to.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm going to start. I've heard this last week is a guy that he actually implemented a little, maybe not 10 minutes, but maybe 2 or 3 of
Hmm.
meditation and breathing in between when switching tasks. And I thought, wow, that's an awesome idea because I've never thought of that. You're
Hmm.
really engaged in whatever you're
Right.
doing, and you have to stop and try to engage, and it takes just a little bit of time to make that. Transition. So
Hmm.
anyway, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's very similar to the whole idea of taking naps throughout the day rather than just having a big sleep at
Yeah.
night, right? So yeah, so it's this on a micro scale. It's kind of like these mini meditation sessions in between each task to allow the
Yeah.
brain maybe to make sense of all the different activities and kind of create some sort of barrier so it doesn't get all mushed together,
Yeah.
right?
I saw. I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you one more question before we
Yeah,
go. But
absolutely.
no, there just was actually. I read a piece just the other day about napping in the afternoon again. I don't know if
Hmm.
it's trying to make a resurgence, but they were just saying, how much more productive that we could be
Right.
by taking. I think it said like a 30-minute nap. What's your
Hmm.
opinion on that?
Well, there are studies, I believe in Europe, that's a quite common practice.
Yeah.
Can't remember the specific country, so but from what I recall, and of course we could always look at it, is Sweden. They highly encourage that, and it seems to maybe have the same effect as the one tip, which is to have those kind of like mini naps or meditation sessions in
Yeah.
between, right? And allows like the brain to kind of recharge itself instead of just going full throttle
Right.
for so long. So it's like it's really a way for the brain just to kind of take breaks
Yeah.
so that it could begin to like kind of recharge, consolidate the memories and so forth, and then get going again because as much as we like to go at 100%, that's just a fast way to go into burnout mode too.
Right, right. All right,
Hmm.
Felix. I'd certainly appreciate it. We'll get you back on here and we can talk a lot more. There's a lot of great information for our audience for sure. But
Excellent.
you bet. So that's going to do it for another episode of the Business of Business podcast. Of course, you can find us at www.thebusinessofbusinesspodcast.com. We're on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Spotify. If we're not on one that you listen to, please reach out. I'd be glad to get it added and make it easier for your listening. Also, we're on all the major social media platforms. Probably hang out on Instagram a little bit more than anywhere else. So reach out there. We'd love to interact with you. A video of this interview will go up on our YouTube channel. So be sure and check that out when the episode goes live. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your business.